Go.
Hi everyone at the British Psychological Association 2017 meeting. Wish I could be with you in person, truly I do. But we can't always have what we want, and it's a pleasure to have this opportunity to at least share with you some of the things that are dear to my heart and I think very, if not important on a scale of theoretical importance, of historical interest to anyone in the field of psychology and psychotherapy who wants a holistic awareness and knowledge of the background of this incredibly wonderful profession that I feel so privileged to be a part of. I want to thank with all my heart Robin Thorburn, the marvellous presenter who you've already heard and who you'll hear more from after you listen to me. He's one of the people carrying the REBT flag since my late husband, Albert Ellis, passed away. Gosh, in July the 24th marks the 10th anniversary of his passing. So I thank Robin so much for having me a part of this presentation, and again, I thank all of you for being there and being here and listening. So as Robin may have already mentioned to you, I'll be sharing with you in the short time I have during a workshop some of the aspects that are unique to REBT, and most especially some of the key experiences of my late great husband's life, adversities that he coped with, learned from, and from him, in a sense, being his own guinea pig, his own test subject, his own success in minimizing emotional suffering, and then translating what he learned from his own experience, coupling it with what he studied and researched. All of that together formed what was to be REBT, Rational Emotive Behaviour Therapy, and that heralded in the cognitive revolution in psychotherapy. So I'll start with talking about some of those adversities, what he learned from them and how they are a part of REBT, and then I'll go on to share a few additional things with you. When Al was an infant, he suffered from many physical ailments. He spent many long months at a time in hospital, and his busy parents rarely would visit him. And this young boy, 3.5, 4 years old, I'm not dramatizing or romanticizing his story. You can read his own words in many of his books, including his autobiography, which is called All Out. So he would feel understandably extremely sad. Most of the other children in his ward were visited by doting parents and friends, and Al hardly was ever. And he made a decision that he didn't want to feel so sad anymore. And so he found things to do, things that would occupy his mind, bring him some enjoyment, and distract him from the sad reality that his parents were not there. So he would read every book in the hospital library, in the children's hospital library. He would talk to visitors of the other children on the ward. When the visiting time was over, he would talk to the other children. He'd make up games. He would use his imagination to daydream about what he would do when he grew up. He, even at that young age, fell in love with all the pretty nurses around him. And by doing any and all of these things, and by not thinking on the fact that his parents weren't there, he felt less sad. It's 3.5, 4, and then, older childhood ages. And this behaviour that he came up with, little genius that he was, is a part of rational emotive behaviour therapy, cognitive distraction. So then, fast forwarding a little bit, and he's a teenager and his hormones are ablazing. To quote him, fell in love with 110 out of 100 girls that he might see around. Yet he was painfully shy. He wanted to go out on dates, as many of his male friends were doing with girls, but Al was too shy to approach them, to speak to them. And he wanted to change this. He had around that time been reading the work of the behaviourist Watson and Watson's assistant Mary Covert Jones, and the way they used in vivo desensitization to help little kiddies who were phobic, who were so afraid of little animals, get over their fears and phobias by gradually exposing the child to that which the child feared, and distracting the child somewhat over a course of sessions. And towards the end, as a result of this, the children who successfully responded to this were playing with the little animal, had no fear. And Al thought, well, if it's good enough for the little kiddies, it's good enough for me. Let me try this. Let me push myself to do uncomfortably that which I want to get comfortable at, i.e. talking to women, making dates, going out with girls. So he gave himself the homework of talking to 100 women over the month of August in the Bronx Botanical Gardens here in New York, which was near where he lived and worked, with the intention of, while speaking with him, reminding himself there's nothing terrible in all likelihood that's going to result from this. Even if they reject me, I can stand it. He did the behaviour with the conscious intention and expectation of, despite feeling uncomfortable, doing the action that could lead to him feeling more comfortable in behaving the way he wanted to. So spoke to 100 girls, women. Out of them, made one date, and she didn't show up. But he got over his fear. And this technique of gradual exposure, of in vivo desensitization, is one of the methods used to help people applying REBT to themselves. Similarly, around that time, when Al was in college, he was voted president of a political group which required him to give speeches, and initially he was very afraid of doing so. But he applied that same technique in vivo desensitization, pushing himself to speak in front of people, reminding himself, in all probability, this won't kill me, this won't kill them, I can do it, I can stand feeling uncomfortable. And within a very short time, not only did he not feel, he actually enjoyed. And lucky for millions and millions of people in the following decades of his life, people who heard him speak and learned his technique and changed their life for the better as a result of what they learned. So then, let's look at Al as a young man around 24, and he fell madly in love with a teenage girl. Her name was Carol. She was around 18 or 19 at the time, and they were dating, and he thought she was the love of his life, and they would be romantic and quite intimate and so forth. And actually, you can read more about this in his autobiography. I don't have time to go into the whole story, but they're actually married for 18 hours. Her parents found out they married in secret, and so her parents forced them to annul the marriage, which they could do because Carol was not yet 21. In any case, so Carol, according to Al, was on again, off again, according to Al, a little bit crazy, but he didn't say that in a negative sense, just, I guess, kind of flamboyant and changeable in her personality. And one night, when Al was around 24, after they had had dinner and a very romantic, intimate encounter, she walked into the door of her parents' home. At that time, usually adult or teen kids, young adults lived in their parents' homes till they got married, but apparently this night her parents were out, so they had a chance to really do what they wanted to do. Carol walks out to the door and says, "Oh, I think we should break up. I'm young and whatever reasons, let's break up." And Al said and wrote, like, you know, this was one of the most sad times of his life. He felt deep despondency, and it was a warm night. He went to the Bronx Botanical Gardens and went for a walk around the lake there, and he was not suicidal, but he felt life could have no more pleasure for him, no more meaning without Carol. And he was thinking such thoughts. He could never be happy, and he had an epiphany. And he realized that it wasn't Carol's rejection of him that created his depression and despondency about that, but it was what he was telling himself about that she should love him as much as he loves her, that in the past she told him she would be his girl forever. She should stick to that. As I mentioned before, he was telling himself life can have no joy, no meaning without her. I can never be happy. And he realized that it wasn't Carol's rejection again, it was his thoughts. And he started questioning these thoughts and assumptions. There was no evidence that he could never be happy again without Carol. And he considered that even worst case scenario, if he wasn't going to be as happy again without Carol in his life, there still realistically were other things in life that brought him deep satisfaction, reading and studying and helping other people. And so one by one he reflected on his beliefs and through questioning them realized that in fact they were irrational. There was no logical or realistic substance to them. And he felt less despondent. He felt less desperate for Carol in his life. And he was aware that he was a victim up until his new awareness and epiphany, that he was a victim of the tyranny of the shoulds. She should love me as much. I shouldn't have to be without the woman who promised she would be with me. Karen Horney coined that expression, and Al read her work among countless other authors who wrote about psychology, psychiatry, and related topics. So that understanding that it's not an event, but our attitude towards it, a philosophy, by the way, Al had also read about when reading the Stoic philosophers like Epictetus. That is a part of REBT. The realization that we are responsible for our own emotional destinies. And when we think in terms of shoulds and demands and other irrational ways, which Robin will share with you more specifically, then we create our debilitating, often destructive emotions. So that became part of REBT. Al, and again, in the short time I have, I don't have time to go into many details, but through his interest not only in the human mind, but more specifically in relationships and romance and love and sex, Al did a lot of reading and research on that and started actually in his apartment the LAMP, L-A-M-P, Love and Marriage Problems Institute, and was helping people. And it was the time of the Depression. So he was working with his father to earn money, but as soon as he could, he went back to college and got his master's and got his PhD at Columbia University Teachers College, which I'm so delighted to say, in that very same building that Al studied in. I'm now teaching REBT, so it's a great delight for me. So he graduated, got his master's PhD, and at that time, psychoanalysis was the dominant approach, probably the only approach in psychotherapy, and Al was practicing that under supervision in his early years. And saying that he was born with a gene for efficiency, he observed that whilst many of his clients, or in those days people called the people who worked with psychiatrists or psychotherapists patients, now more and more psychotherapists prefer the word client because the word patient can imply someone is ill. In any case, I'll notice more and more people, though they felt good after a session, they weren't getting better. They were continuing to think in the ways that created debilitating emotions. And Al began to be more active, directive in his sessions, giving the people he worked with homework, contemplating writing. In the early 50s, he wrote his early articles on what was then called rational therapy. It became called rational emotive therapy some years later. In 1993, it was called rational emotive behavior therapy to reflect its holistic nature, the premise that our thoughts and our emotions and our behavior are inseparably intertwined. So when he first presented REBT to his peers and colleagues in 1956 at the American Psychological Association event in Chicago that year, he was made fun of, he was booed by members of the audience, called simplistic and stupid, and true to the principles of REBT, though he would have enjoyed being at the very least accepted, if not lauded, for his good work, he didn't need it. And if anything, it contributed to motivating him to work even harder to make the then rational therapy more widely used, understood, and accepted, not only by therapists and clients, but by people in the general public, because Al, who was one of the greatest humanists, I believe, with all my heart to walk this earth, genuinely cared about the well-being of all people, not only those who could afford to come to therapy or who even wanted to come to therapy. And he realized from a very young age how quickly life passes and that we do have a choice. It's a choice about how we feel when not only good things happen, but when bad things happen. And he wanted to educate and inspire as many people as possible to learn how to help themselves and prevent unnecessary emotional suffering and thereby experience greater joy in life. So he persevered, created the famous Albert Ellis Institute, and that was his pride, his joy, his baby. People would come from all over the country and all over the world to study there. You know, the professionals in the field, members of the general public would come to his weekly workshop. He would see clients there, therapists in training and other professional REBT therapists would work there. So it was a centre for learning and education and reinforcement and training, and it was a marvellous, marvellous place and contributed to the well-being of literally millions. Well, fast forwarding now to the final chapter of his life, the final, let's say, 5 years. We were already together and married at that time. As you may guess, Al was quite a bit older than I was, and so even though I have a lot more years ahead of my life, I'm quite convinced. Sadly, we didn't get more years together. But in any case, and Robin may tell you more about this, our union was rare and incredible and extraordinary. Whilst I'm not a genius, and he certainly was, we were on the same wavelength. We had the same intentions. We embraced the principles of REBT, not only in sharing it with people in our work life, but living its principles. And in my experience, Al, along with just a rare few others I've known, who that includes my parents, was one of the greatest models of practicing what he preached during times of adversity. So in his final years, there was a too short period of immense joy, of our being together, of our working together in his precious institute, and then something that he did not predict that came suddenly and shockingly. He was fired from he was stopped from working in his own institute. He was kicked off the board of directors of his non-for-profit institute. He had been the president. And now it didn't stop us from continuing to work. We did rent a room in the building next door so we could continue to teach our his famous Friday night workshop. We kept on working, co-leading groups, and he saw clients. He continued to do much writing. But he also used a lot of energy in his and our attempts to gain justice. There were some lawsuits going, and one of them was completed in his lifetime. The unfair dismissal of the board. Al was reinstated by a judge who said what had been done to him was disingenuous. Regarding the other lawsuits that were around unfair dismissal, stopping him, from working in his institute, age discrimination and other issues, Al died before that could come to any conclusion. So this period after this situation in the institute was the most sad period in his life. The fatigue of fighting for justice, along with all the work he was continuing to do, led to him at the age of 91, 92, succumbing to pneumonia, which was the beginning of his slow end. He died 15 months later. But during this time, of the master being so severely tested, he practiced what he preached. He was even quoted in, it was either the New York Times or New York Magazine, as saying, while I hate what they're doing, the people in the institute who had gotten rid of him and were putting out stories that were utter falsehoods. One of the stories of his losing it, which was not true. And in fact, we videotaped the workshops we did in the building next door, and whilst he had fragile health, he did not lose his capacity to teach and inspire people. So in those final 15 months, we were in hospital rehab. The New York Times and other magazines covered it, and he was quoted as saying, I hate what they're doing, but I don't hate them. Truly practicing unconditional other acceptance that Robin is going to say more about, if he hasn't already mentioned that prior to your listening to me. He practiced what he preached. We focused every day on what still was good during that most sad period of our lives. And at that time, with his health failing, since he was a realist, accepting the probability, which turned out to be the outcome, that he wasn't going to retain any power in his institute or position, we focused every day on what still was good. And at that stage, it was the love between us. And by taking time each day, throughout the day and the night, to hold each other's hands, to hug, to be together, to enjoy that. It didn't mean we were repressing the deep sadness about the other stuff that was going on, but we were not allowing that to dominate our conscious awareness of our day-to-day life. And our focus on our love prevented depression and other such debilitating emotions. He practiced what he preached till the end, a great model of the efficacy of REBT. So I hope that through sharing with you some of these episodes of his life and the way that through coping with his own adversities and translating the how-tos of coping into a way that academics and non-academics could embrace and apply, coming up with the simplicity of his ABC framework, which Robin no doubt will share with you if he hasn't already today. Al's life and his suffering and his overcoming of suffering uplifted and improved the lives of countless people. I mentioned earlier that he was a genius. I do hope I'm not going way over time. I will give a shout out to Robin, who's hearing this as he records it. Robin, am I out of time?
Yeah, if you start to wind up, you're doing really well. You're okay, you still got time left.
Okie dokie, great. So I mentioned to you earlier that Al was a genius and a visionary, way ahead of his times. And whilst he certainly gave credit to those who influenced him, like the Stoics, Epictetus, Marcus Aurelius, other philosophers of ancient times, Eastern philosophers, some of his contemporary philosophers and those in fields related to his, Alfred Adler was an influence, and many others. You can read about them, or Robin may mention a few more. So, in addition to being so well read, in addition to his own innate genius and brilliance, in addition to his golden heartedness, his goodness. Any of you who heard him live or saw videos will know that at times he had kind of, to say the least, a colourful vocabulary and a gruff way of speaking, and appeared very confronting, but truly, the goal of that was to shake people out of any rigid thinking and complacency and encourage them to start working on thinking more rationally and less irrationally if they were creating unnecessary emotional suffering. And he cared, he authentically cared. I have a few excerpts from some of his personal journals that he wrote as a teen and as an early adult, just to give you a sense of what a high-minded, that sounds wrong, that can imply kind of snobby, can't it? And I am talking to the Brits. By the way, I'm originally from Australia, so we share the same queen. He was aware of things long before there was the scientific research to prove the veracity of them. For example, part of REBT, as you've heard or will hear, includes homework, the importance of homework. And a number of the homework techniques are given to a client to be done for at least 30 days. Well, now research on neuroplasticity, neurophysiology, has shown that it takes at least 30 days for new neural pathways to be formed. And Al intuitively knew or sensed that 30-day period as a minimum period contributing to more substantial change in people. Anyway, on a related and unrelated note, just to give you a sense of the uniqueness of Albert Ellis, here are a few lines from his personal journals that he wrote when he was a teen. Today is my 17th birthday, and to see how my mind runs at this stage of my life, I'll review my plans for the future and my ambitions. And he talks about wanting to become financially independent, because this was a time of the Depression. He had very little money, and he wanted to become financially independent to help more people. So he didn't need to work at menial jobs, rather could do work to help more people. And he goes on about other things, and he completes that part of his journal by saying, when I can afford to, I would start a campaign for the betterment of humanity, present and future. I would do my best to further my principles. I hope one day my daydreams can come true. I've cut out a few of the words. He wrote at that time, around that time, I would like to be pointed out in the future as one who, like Aristotle and others, advocated great things long before people in general took them seriously. He wrote two more quotes and then a few more words, and then I hand back over to the wonderful Robin Thorburn. Al wrote, the best thing to do is not waste away the hours thinking why you are here, but knowing that you are here, to make the best of it, to try to get all the advantages life can give you with as few disadvantages as possible. Finally, he wrote around that time, my doctrine, isn't it cute for a 17-year-old to write, my doctrine is to do away with revenge and to substitute forgiveness as far as is humanly and practically possible. So a few final words here. A few of the aspects unique to REBT that are not seen as much or emphasized as much in other cognitive approaches are REBT's philosophical component and emphasis. In articles written in 2003 and 2005, Al wrote, along with Aaron Beck and Christine Podesky, one of Aaron Beck's students, now known as a great CBT teacher in her own right, about the difference between CBT and REBT, and all three agreed was REBT had the greatest, in terms of emphasis, philosophical thrust. And REBT, more than other approaches, emphasizes the importance of unconditional acceptance, unconditional self-acceptance, unconditional other acceptance, and unconditional life acceptance. REBT has great precision in the disputing of irrational core beliefs. Rather than simply say, be aware of your negative core belief and change it into a positive or healthy one, REBT says, be aware of your irrational beliefs and then dispute the life out of it and then come up with your effective new rational beliefs. And REBT instructs us in the way to most precisely and substantially dispute, pragmatically, Socratically, logically. REBT, more than other approaches, specifically encourages us to look for our demands, our musts, and our shoulds. One of Al's greatest wishes, and one of mine, is that more research be done. One of the excellent, great contributions of CBT is the body of excellent research that has been done on principles. Now, all the CBT research that I've read, by no means I've read all of it, but a lot of it supports the principles of REBT, which is not surprising since CBT was so greatly influenced by the work of Albert Ellis. Aaron Beck acknowledges the influence of Albert Ellis. So it's not surprising, but Al would have loved more research to be done on REBT principles specifically, one of them being the impact of musts, the impact of unhealthy philosophies of life on our emotional well-being. And as time goes on since Al's passing, sad to say, I'm witnessing increasing marginalisation of REBT. And a number of younger students I meet and speak to when I go as a visiting professor here or there, and a student might have just read about Al's approach or done a general introductory or attended a general introductory lecture on psychology and heard about that. Many younger students wrongly believe that REBT came after CBT, or it's a little bump on the back of CBT, and they're not aware of the historical chronology and facts, nor of those unique principles that have REBT stand apart from a more general CBT. So I'm in no way criticising CBT. I'm just acknowledging the unique gifts of REBT. In my view, the most holistic, humanistic, and no nonsense of the psychotherapeutic approaches. So I urge you to learn more about it if you don't already know a lot about it. And if you work with other people, practice it on them. More importantly, to practice it in your own life, to minimize suffering and maximize joy. And through doing that, you become a healthy and more authentic model of REBT's efficacy. And experience greater fulfillment in this one life we have. So forgive me if I've gone over time, and it's been a pleasure to be part of your workshop. Again, sorry I can't see you, and hope that some of my words have contributed to you, benefited you, or if nothing else, been of interest. Enjoy the rest of your workshop and all of your conference, and thank you for having me with you during this time. Bye.